was not good in the slightest.
No, not good. Definitely not good.
Okay, well, you're
uh,
good to go whenever.
doesn't mean it's not entertaining, but
I was gonna say bad horror movies are usually the best because
yes,
there's that one classic clip of that dude. Oh, they're eating her, and then they're going to eat me.
I
Oh
remember you
my
showing me
god.
that.
Yeah, it was so bad.
Yep, and the garbage day.
Garbage Day is iconic. I don't care what anyone
Garbage
says.
day.
Yeah, that the
That's
man
a
just
Santa
hates.
Claus
Yeah,
movie.
I know. That's what makes it even worse.
It's
Is
a
that
killer Santa Claus.
honestly, if there's one horror movie that I do want, it's Hello Governor from Regular Show. That I would unironically watch every day of the week.
I don't even know what that is, but I'm sure it's
It's
better than what I watched.
it is a haunted British taxi that just drives around looking for people, and every time it sees someone, it goes, "Hello, governor," and then runs them over.
That's what if I was a serial killer, I would definitely have a catchphrase. I
Well, there
like,
you go. It could be "Hello, governor."
it
I
would be
mean,
something
what's
like
better than
that.
that?
I don't know if copyrights if I'm able to do that, but that would be so great. Just your serial killer catchphrase is like, "That's how the cookie crumbles," and then you get some like fabulous anime music, like straight out of Persona 5, blasting as you run away.
I mean, you might as well. I
It's
feel like there's
amazing.
potential there.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the Waiting in the Sky podcast with TJ Starman. I am your host, TJ Starman, and this is the second episode of season 2 of the podcast. So, you know what they say? First is the worst, second is the best. I don't know if I want to lock into that. I don't know if that benefits me one way or the other, actually. But I'm very excited to be recording this episode. There's a lot of fun topics here today. I am going to be having a Batman conversation leading into this week's debut of the Batman starring Robert Pattinson. So we wanted to kind of discuss the cinematic history of the character. And what we came up with was what I'm dubbing Build a Batman. So, going to take different elements of each of these movie Batman actors and then combine them into one ideal Batman character. And I'm so excited to be bringing a buddy of mine, Isaac, on for that segment. We're going to be talking all of those movies and all of the best parts of those Batman actors. So, very great conversation. And then I in the last episode, I talked about how I had been wanting to talk about the Chicago Bulls because I was so miserable talking about the Chicago Bears. And I'm finally ready to be hurt again. So it's another year. We're officially into the off season of the NFL. So I return to the fountain of eternal hope and am going to be looking at the Bears draft prospects. I am going to be joined by Windy City Gridiron's Jacob Infante to have that discussion. I'm so excited to have him joining the podcast for this conversation. I took a crack at a mock draft, and this is not something that I do. However, it is something that Jacob does very, very well. And so we're going to have him take a look at my mock draft and see how I did overall and see if it's something that's going to work potentially or maybe it's something that is just absolutely tragic, which I would not be surprised if it was the case since I mostly went in blind with that mock draft situation. So a couple of really great segments in this episode. I'm super excited to get into them. But before we do, of course, it's time to return to everyone's favorite segment established in the last episode, the dick pic with Richard Hugh III. Richard, how are you doing
Hello.
today?
Oh, I'm alive.
Very good to hear. Uh, so what do you have for us to talk about today?
Well, Elden Ring just did come out a few days ago, and that got me thinking about the overall difficulty level in gaming in general in recent years. But I think I want to start off with Elden Ring just because everyone's been waiting for it for God knows how long at this point.
It's a Soulsborne game from Software, so it's to be expected. So I did not make the most progress, but I did have a chance to kind of dip my toe into this Elden Ring experience and get a feel for it. I overall, after a few hours, I'm pretty satisfied and excited about continuing with this game. It's a lot to adjust to as someone who's not really familiar with all of the Soulsborne type games. I think prior to this one, my only real experience was a couple of hours in Demon Souls for PS5, which I'll mention that I am playing Elden Ring on PS5. Uh, I did hear some things about the performance of. I think the PC was the one that had
Ooh,
the more
dude.
relevant issues.
Oh my god, yeah, I was poking around on Steam yesterday because I can't pick up the game yet. When I can, I will, but I was poking around on Steam and looking at some of the reviews, and already they got a little bit of grief, like a week or 2 ago when they announced the specs, and it was like, "Yeah, we're gonna recommend that you have at least 16 gigs of RAM to run this thing." So immediately warning signs were already going off in people's heads like, "That's not very optimized now, is it?" Well, it gets even worse from there because there's people that have better gaming rigs than I do, and I'm running with like a 3070 Ti, and these guys are having frame rate issues where it's dropping below 10 and staying there. So right now, the PC release, from what I hear, is just an absolute nightmare to try to slog through. There's a couple things you can do to make it a little bit better, but most of the time you're just sacrificing graphical quality for performance, as is tradition with PC gamers. But yeah, so far for day one stuff, honestly, kind of par for the course when it comes to AAA launch,
Yeah,
just because most of the time now people don't give a damn about optimizing anything. They're like, "Oh, we'll push a day one patch or Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, we'll patch it in about a year or so. We don't care." Like let's take your money first, and then if we get enough money from you, then we'll update it.
yeah. That does seem to be a pattern that is unfortunately taking shape over these last few years.
It's
Uh,
absolutely scummy. Like, I mean, I remember memes when like my freshman year of college of the Assassin's Creed games coming out, and it's like people's eyes are like falling out of their character models and everything's bugging out. And you figured with all the backlash they got for that, people would fix that. But nah, they kind of realized, wow, these guys did this and got away with it. Maybe we can get away with it too.
yeah, yeah. No, first of all, how dare you? Assassin's Creed Unity actually, runs really well in the year 2022 on a PlayStation 5. So
Sure.
you'll do well to mind your tongue, Richard. But yeah, no, it's definitely it's a scummy practice, like you said, because it's not even promised that they will fix a lot of these issues or do it in a decent amount of time. And you mentioned a frame rate of less than 10 frames, like that is just atrocious. I can't imagine that. Like I was playing with a lot of PlayStation 5 games, they do have a simplified option of either a performance mode or a graphical mode. Um, and Elden Ring is no different. So I was playing it in the performance mode, emphasizing frame rate, and it still chugged at times, but did not get anywhere near like, oh my gosh, 10 frames per second would be absolutely awful. I mean, it didn't look like it's not the most beautiful game, but it also doesn't need to be given its art style and everything too. But I think that overall, like it is running fine, and it's going to smooth out a little bit as we do get some patches. But it's at least on the console version that I'm playing, it's not broken the way it sounds like it was on these PC versions.
Well, the nice thing about console releases is they take the time to make those options. Whereas on PC, you've got to think about the billions of different configurations that people are going to have on their specific gaming rig. And then From Software has to sit there and think, okay, well, how are we going to run through every single graphical option ever to make sure it's compatible with everything? They don't have any knowledge of that. So when it comes to stuff like this, if they need to take like an extra day or 2 to see how stuff is running and then fix it, I can understand that. But I mean, at least with stuff like the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, they know what they're working with no matter what, and they know, like, what settings to tweak and what to do to get it to run perfectly on that specific console. Now, that said, I didn't even know that they were doing, like, a performance mode and then a graphical quality mode. That's honestly a pretty, I would say a pretty decent idea, but at the same time, it's like, if you already know what you're working with, why not just get the best of both worlds and not even have the option?
Yeah, I think, and I would imagine that's what they had been doing in the past with console releases, is kind of finding that middle ground to optimize it that way for people. So for an audience that largely didn't know what they were, working with at the time, of the PS2 and that type of era. Now that, PC gaming had exploded so much and people actually understand the different settings of video quality, I think they probably just put those options into the more recent games, and especially like AAA games, as a way of acknowledging that and giving people just a little bit more choice in how they want to approach their gameplay. So I do appreciate that for sure. But here's, watch this segue, Richard. Ready? I don't know what's harder, trying to navigate Elden Ring's graphical settings on PC or playing the game itself.
Hey, you're learning. That was good. But,
Yes, evolving.
but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's classic Souls difficulty, the kind where it's like you wake up in the morning and a guy just chucks a house at you and then you're dead. That's just classic Dark Souls gameplay.
I can attest to that. That has been my experience thus far.
Well, I was watching Moist Critical play a little bit on YouTube, and he was just walking around a field, and all of a sudden, this just giant golden dude on a big golden horse just runs over to him and just jabs him once and dead. But it's one of those things where it's like he didn't know that's supposed to be later in the game that you actually fight that guy. So he's just throwing himself at this dude, and like 30 plus times later, he finally kills him. So that's the thing about Souls games is like you can stray from the path and like go you can go fight a mountain if you feel like it, even if you're level 1, but it's going to take you a long time to realize what you're actually doing.
Yeah, yeah, that's what, in my minimal experience, admittedly, with Demon Souls and now Elden Ring, that's happened to me both times where I just kind of wandered, not knowing where I was going, and ended up in a spot that I was nowhere near prepared to be at that point in the game, and didn't. There's no clues telling me that that wasn't the case, or if they were very subtle, and so I didn't pick up on them. Would get frustrated, and it's like I'm going to end this session right now. And then who knows if I'm ever going to feel like picking it back up again, which is what happened with Demon Souls. I do want to
Yeah.
get back to it, but I'll probably have to do it after Elden Ring gets me back into this mode.
Yeah, for a good contrast, this is like a 5-year-old wandering into the middle of WrestleMania, and Hulk Hogan just, like, picks him up and just slams him into the ground, and everyone's cheering. That's what all the Soul games are like. That's what every single one of them are like.
Yeah.
And then that 5-year-old just gets back up and he's like, "Alright, we're doing this again until I get it." And
Right,
that's
right. And it's all because the 5-year-old, instead of, waddling over to the kindergarten entrance, accidentally wandered onto a bus that took him to WrestleMania.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what all these games are like. But honestly, it's built for a specific kind of person. Like you got to be at least a little bit of a glutton for punishment to play any kind of Souls game. That or at least appreciate a good challenge.
For sure. So Richard, I guess kind of the big question in all of this is, does that difficulty standard make playing these games more enjoyable, less enjoyable, or does it really have any significant effect on the actual, enjoyment that you can get from them?
That is a good question. And honestly, it just depends on the type of player you are because I know people that just live to get mad at video games. A very good example of that is League of Legends. I don't know if you know anyone who plays League of Legends, but there was a guy a couple years ago I was rooming with, and he was in the middle of a game, and in the ranked system for League, it's like you have X amount of points, and you have to keep winning matches to get more points. And then once you get high enough, you play like 3 promo games. You win 2 out of 3, you get promoted to the next rank. He was in one of his promos. He was a 1-to-1 and he lost. And this guy just straight up just punches his laptop so hard that his fist almost comes out the back of the screen. And he just had ended up having to toss it. It was absolutely crazy.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, there are people that just live to get mad at things, and honestly, they end up, like, taking it out in video games. Ah, crap, my phone's going off.
And so Richard took a call from his father, who had accidentally called in the middle of the podcast to see how his day was going.
Anyways, back to difficult video games. There are literally just some people that just, like, live to be angry at something, and they end up taking everything out on video games. That's why you have so many angry gamers, honestly. Like, there's so many people that play online where all they do is they just scream and rage and get mad, and then they get off, and then they're like, "Man, that was so much fun. I can't wait to do it all again tomorrow."
Who needs to pay for therapy when you can pay $60, well, $70 for the new Call of Duty every year?
Yeah, exactly. An interesting point there. Apparently, this next year they're going to be skipping a year and waiting until 2023 for the next Call of Duty.
I saw well, okay, I think I actually saw that they're skipping the 2023 release.
Oh, okay.
So I think they do have one in the can for probably this November. But I think it's the next one they're skipping, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, that would make sense. But honestly, I'm okay with them skipping a year because I'm so sick of them. Honest to God, Call of Duty is like one of the most unashamed copy and paste the engine into every subsequent game and tweak one thing, and then you market it as something brand spanking new, and they just make millions of dollars.
Yeah, I to be honest, I beat the most recent release, the campaign. I still am a unicorn who loves playing campaigns in video games and primarily play that and not do a whole lot of multiplayer. And so I beat that one. It just was such a strain just now trying to think of what the name of that release was. Do you know what it was?
God, I haven't kept up on a COD release in years. I can
It
look
was
it up real quick.
Call of Duty Vanguard. And it
Oh,
it
okay.
took me pretty much, the entire time you were talking to come up with that.
Yeah, see, just looking it up right now, audience rating summary 2 stars. That's how you know that they're doing so well. But here's the thing. That's 6,563 people. So no matter how crappy Call of Duty is, they're still going to have that dedicated fan base that just goes and gives them money for no reason other than, ooh, new Call of Duty.
Yep, yep, exactly.
Now I
The
hate to make this comparison, but unfortunately in recent years Nintendo's kind of become that way about Mario. I'm not talking Mario Odyssey. Mario Odyssey was an absolute fantastic game, but like new Super Mario Brothers, new Super Mario Brothers Wii, new Super Mario Brothers Wii U, then new Super Mario Brothers U Deluxe for the Switch. It's literally the same game.
Yep. Yeah, it's, when you build a brand like that that people admire it and recognize as something that they enjoy, you get to kinda coast a little bit, and I think that, those are 2 examples of companies doing that for sure.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Richard, that was a great conversation that navigated from Elden Ring into difficult video games, into companies scamming us, and I really appreciated every minute of it.
That's what we do here. Nothing makes sense and everything is random.
Well, say hi to your dad for me when you give him a call back, and let's take a quick break, and then once we get back, we'll jump into the Build a Batman conversation with Isaac. All right, welcome back to the Waiting in the Sky podcast with TJ Starman. It's time for Batman. The new movie is coming out. If you're listening to this episode on release, then it comes out tomorrow/tonight. Or if you're listening to it later, then you may have already seen it, in which case, hope it was good. But to tie into the release of The Batman, I thought it'd be a good excuse to talk about incorporating different elements of each film depiction of Batman into one. What would be this kind of amalgamation of cinematic Batman, and what would it look like? And so I wanted to bring someone in who could really talk to the different traits that Batman has, the different iconic elements that the character possesses. And I brought Isaac, aka InfernalGriffin, on Twitch, YouTube, all of those gaming channels, to bring his side of things into this conversation. So let's welcome in Isaac. How are you?
Oh, thanks for having me, TJ. Seriously, this has been a nice little out of the blue surprise, and it's nice to be here.
I'm super grateful for you to be here. It's great to have people that have a meaningful voice to contribute to these conversations that I'm just coming up with because I think they'd be fun, and being able to have these conversations instead of just monologuing to myself has been fantastic so far with this relaunch of the podcast. So thank you again for being here. Isaac, so we met, I can't think of the exact year, but I know we met through Greek life at UNO where we went to college. And so it's been nice to kind of follow you from afar with what you've been doing with Twitch, and I know you're on YouTube as well, doing the streaming thing. How has that just that journey been unfolding for you?
Like most things, it's slow, it's steady, it's a grind. You got to put probably more effort into it than you think. I know YouTube, I've been meaning to kind of get started. I've only kind of just gotten that underway, and it's taken really 5 years for me to get off my lazy backside to do that. But Twitch has been slow and steady. It's difficult to say the least, and I'm not going to let anyone convince me otherwise because I think everything's difficult if you want to be successful at it. And
Sure.
but yeah, you're right about the whole college thing. I believe it was either fall of 11 or spring of 12. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it
that's
definitely has been a while.
yeah.
Well, we also the other connection we have is we both did our time at GameStop.
Those days.
Yes, the very formative experience of more or less ripping people off.
Yeah, if only we would have gotten in on the stock game in January of last year, then we could have returned the favor.
Yep. Yep. You didn't cash in on your stock option?
Oh no, I don't even. uh,
So, what's your background with Batman? What kind of perspective are you coming into this conversation with?
I've had very limited. I've got very limited, but still insightful looks into the comics, but not as deep as someone obviously much older or more committed to it. But I'm very familiar with the film, the animated series, and a lot, obviously, of the gaming side as well, and just the portrayals from that angle. But since most of it's going to be focused on the films today, I've pretty much been refreshing myself a little bit, at least with the older films, considering they came out when we were kind of growing up, so we didn't always catch all the finer details when we're kids. So
Yeah, yeah, and I kind of did the same thing to refresh my memory of some of those older movies. And you touched on it there. I definitely wanted to keep this focused on the films themselves, to tie into the expectations that we have for Robert Pattinson as Batman. But you made a very good point that there is a lot of Batman out there, and so there's a lot to pull from. And kind of the compromise we decided, ahead of recording, is to include a wild card option. And I'll go into, well, let's just go into the full details of how we're going to do this. So this build a Batman concept, we are going to break down the Batman character into some of the most important elements. And what we decided on are the Bruce Wayne side of things, the costume, detective skills, physicality, gadgets, the Batmobile, the voice, a villain, and then as a bonus round, the Alfred. And so those are all elements that we thought kind of encompassed what this Batman character is as a whole. And so we will choose one element, one depiction of the character as that element. So if I wanted to choose an Alfred, I could choose Sir Michael Caine.
Sir Michael Caine, indeed.
So we're gonna try and keep it to the movies. We also don't want any particular depiction to dominate the conversation. So we also had the internal rule of limiting it to only 3 per version. But what we decided on as well as an interesting element to throw in there is the one wild card choice. And so that wild card choice for any of these traits, you can choose a depiction outside of the movies. So if you want to go with the animated series, Batman Beyond, even, any of the animated movies or the video games, which we both know well, that is totally on the table for one trait and one trait only. Isaac, do you have any questions before we get into it?
I think we've got this well covered. Let's get this rigor rolling down the road.
All right, bat signals in the air. Let's ride. Let's go one by one. So let's start with Bruce Wayne, the man behind the mask. This might be off the wall and maybe a little bit controversial, but I'm very confident in this answer, which is I went George Clooney. George Clooney is Bruce Wayne.
And it makes a lot of sense, really. Even if you look at Clooney's real personality, or at least how people have depicted George Clooney over the years, he's been kind of the typical alpha of alpha males when it comes to looks, when it comes to money. Clooney makes a lot of sense when it comes to that. So,
Yep.
But I personally decided to go with Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton kind of set the more modern standard, was in the first Batman film alongside Jack Nicholson and a few other great castings of the, I believe it was late 80s, if I remember right.
Yep, 1989.
That's right. But Keaton set the standard. He was a very, very good Bruce Wayne, obviously cleaned up real nice. But you almost have to go with the standard for that. And did they really exceed it, meet it, where'd it go? I found it hard. And even with some of the more limited Batman runs between Val Kilmer and George Clooney, and even between Christian Bale and Ben Affleck, it's hard for them to kind of meet that original suave, if you will.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that. And I think for me, it came down to, I thought Keaton was a candidate here. I also would have had Bale as a candidate here, in my opinion. But I think what sold me is just how effortless Clooney was. And I think, like you hit on it, it's a lot of himself in that portion of his Bruce Wayne in Batman and Robin. And so that's what sold me on it. It was effortless. It was natural. He's just so damn charming. That's my Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, and especially if you look at the time period, what was he doing at the time? He was the top doctor on ER at the time. So it was real easy for that charm and that suave, that bravado. It was such an easy carryover for him.
Yeah,
so it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think a couple of reasonable choices there, despite what some people might think about the Clooney choice. So let's move over to costume. Isaac, where'd you land on the costume?
On the costume, I definitely will have to go Ben Affleck's costume, and I think we might have some agreement here. I'm not entirely sure, but it fit at least from a comic depiction. It fit from really just a functionality perspective. It doesn't look like you're just kind of going in and either just with like a cloth. It doesn't look like it's just shiny rubber. It actually looked like there was some resistance underneath, but it also looked clean. It looked sleek. It looked like you could move in it.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think it kind of matches more of the comic origin without trying to adapt too much to the real world. And this is the choice I chose as well. I think the Batfleck costume is great. I love the way that they do. There's a couple of variations in the movies that he appeared in, but I really like the gray and black color scheme that kind of goes back to like the animated series version. And the only thing, I think you mentioned this as well before recording, but the logo itself for that costume, it's like big and blown out. I'm not the biggest fan of that logo. I think there's some, sleeker designs that really pull off the Batman look a lot better. But overall, that costume, I think it works the best for me.
Yeah, most definitely. It's that symbol was just a little bit and especially if you look into the comics and everything else, the symbol was never just boom in your face. That where that one is, but at the same time, where else are you really going to go? Are you really going to go the nipple suit of George Clooney? No. Are you going to go some of the basic old and definitely looks like it's more rubber suits of Kilmer and Keaton, even though they're very iconic?
So shiny.
Yeah, the problem there is it's shiny. Or are
Yeah.
you going to go with the frickin' basically a soldier suit of Christian Bale? It's
Yeah.
just, I think the Batfleck suit kind of meshed the best of everything, where it definitely stayed true to the origin, and then it didn't. It obviously it wasn't shiny because it's Batman from the shadows, don't want to be seen,
Mhm.
and then it doesn't. It's not big and bulky like it'd be heavy to lug around.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're in pretty solid agreement on the costume with Batfleck. Moving into detective skills, this is going to be the first appearance of a wild card choice. So this is where I use my wild card, and I'm going to go with Batman from the Telltale series. And the reasoning behind that is those games are just built entirely around Batman as a detective. You are investigating crime scenes, you're following up with conversations and sprinkling in details that you have picked up. And I think it's a nice depiction of Batman as a detective. And I wanted to really come in with a creative wild card choice too. And so I think this is a really good fit from that perspective. Where did you
Yeah,
go
that
with it?
I stuck with Batfleck here. I stuck with Ben Affleck's Batman. From the depiction in Batman versus Superman as well as Justice League, you actually do see a lot of the Bruce Wayne in the swanky clothes at these little galas, just he's totally there undercover as Batman investigating, just kind of veering off into the little side halls like he's not supposed to, and picking and putting together all the clues and figuring out, oh, you're this person. Oh, this is this person. Oh,
Yeah,
you kind of
a
see
little
it all.
Bond-esque,
Yeah,
in those ones.
very Bond-esque, and it was kind of nice to see. But I wish we would have gotten a chance to really see them develop that older Batman a bit more. But alas, we're moving on to a new casting, and I'm hoping we can see a bit more detective work than just raw action.
Yeah, we'll see. I know the Flash movie is gonna be bringing in some multiverse chaos, a la Spider-Man No Way Home. So, we might see Keaton, Affleck, who knows how many other Batmen show up again.
The myriad of oh, what are those cameos? There it is. Found the
Yep.
word.
Yep, all the cameos, all the time. Physicality. And so to kind of define this a little bit, both the actual, physique of the character and also like the martial arts aspect of, hand-to-hand combat, running and gliding, jumping on rooftops, all those elements of Batman kind of tied into one trait here. Who did you go with for physicality?
I definitely took the Christian Bale route here. It's definitely low hanging fruit if you really think about it. It's the first film starts with him training with the League of Assassins, so it's very hard to not just look at that immediately and just be like, "Oh, boom, easy choice." It kind of is because it's really the only Batman film that I can remember where you actually see him training in those particular art forms, not only in the first film, but every film he's in, he's always practicing on the wooden, I don't know if they're dummies or what in the world they are, but it's got all the multiple limbs. You see him training on those a few times. And then, of course, you have the Bane breaks Batman's back and the Dark Knight
Yep.
Returns. And then coming back from that, it's, and just his build that he did for that. And Christian Bale as an actor is notorious for this,
Hmm.
being able just to change how he looks on a dime, it seems like, for whatever role he's in. And he was always kind of that peak condition. And it always seemed like he was never out of place. Didn't seem like he was uncomfortable when he was doing if he was doing the stunts. I don't remember if he was or not, but it didn't look like if he was, it would be out of place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very strong argument to go with Bale there. I actually didn't think about any other option besides Batfleck with this one. It seemed pretty obvious to me, just because he's a little bigger, he's bulkier, comes across as more like physically powerful than some of these other depictions of Batman. And so where Bale does show off a lot of just kind of like agility, endurance, stamina, those types of things throughout his trilogy, I think the emphasis on power was clearly there for the Snyderverse version of Batman and Ben Affleck. And I think that it's best shown off in that the warehouse scene in Batman vs Superman. And that scene is awesome. It was pretty much iconic from release. The way that Batman just actually goes into this place and just wrecks shop in a way that has been in every superhero nerd's head for years, and they finally put it on screen. So I think that warehouse scene did a lot of the heavy lifting in making that an obvious choice for me.
That actually makes sense. That scene did definitely tickle my nerd jollies on that one.
So, speaking of tickling nerd jollies, gadgets. Great segue. I'm full of great segues this episode, Isaac. So gadgets, a key element of Batman for sure. Notoriously the utility belt is a key component of the Batman costume. So gadgets, I went with Bale here. I think that really what sold me on this was that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy is very much like set in the real world. And so everything's tied into some sort of grounded reality. And I think this is what made these gadgets shine a bit, because like they seem so realistic. You don't have that built-in doubt of like, well, that type of thing could never exist. Like it actually probably already exists. And the Batman Begins was in 2006. So yeah, these things, pretty much everything in that movie probably exists at this point, which is cool. I think one of the most notable things is from, I think it's Batman Begins, where they tap into like cell phones and they're tracking pretty much the entire city. And Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox is helping Batman track down a target. And I just remember that, like, that moment is in my brain as just this huge highlight of what Wayne Enterprises in that universe is able to do with this technology. And so that stood out to me.
And that definitely makes sense. I come back to, I believe it's a scene in Dark Knight where he goes overseas and he has, just a basic rifle scope to kind of see where he's going, and ends up using, I believe, a grapple and a parachute to go from the top of a crane into a building. It makes a lot of sense. I'm going with my wild card here because I believe gadgets shine the most in the Arkham series video games, more than anything else. The ability to use not only just the regular Batarang, but a remote controlled Batarang, explosive gel, the grapple, being able to glide across the environment. You needed your gadgets to complete the game. It was not just, oh, I'm Batman, I'm going to go around and I'm going to beat people up and it's a linear story and blah, 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 blah. No, it's very much an RPG. You play your style with a few exceptions on boss fights, but you can play your style, whether it's going in and actually being the physical Batman or using all your different gadgets just to mollywop anybody that got in your way.
Yeah, no, that definitely, I think gadgets play a huge role in those games, and are a big reason why you feel like Batman when you're playing, is because you have this background information of how important Batman's gadgets are to what he does, and you get to operate those firsthand. Like even the way that you have to like detect a signal by using the thumbsticks, right? Like you feel like you're actually using those gadgets. And so that, I think that's a really good choice for your wild card, because you get to have that interactive element to it. So I think it's a great fit.
And you definitely don't necessarily see this in the films or a few other ones, but the utilization of the cowls gadgets that are built into it. You don't see that as much in the films. I think you see it a little bit in Batman vs Superman and Justice League and the Snyderverse, but you don't see it as much really outside of the video games to use, using a heartbeat detector or a thermal vision or something like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's another good point for sure. So arguably Batman's greatest gadget is the Batmobile. Where did you end up going with for your vehicle of choice?
And this was just a guilty pleasure of mine. I'm very much into the biggest isn't always the best, but it's oftentimes the coolest in my book. And I went with Christian Bale's very, very unique, basically a mobile, extremely mobile, uh, oh, like an anti-personnel type of basically a tank that it was, and that just rolling down the streets of Gotham and just the tires just being able to roll on themselves and not actually, break an axle or just go over cars and not care. And it was just the rumble down the street. I'm just like, oh, there's Batman. Uh-oh, I'm getting out of the way.
Yeah, no, I think the vehicle is called a tumbler, if I remember that correctly, which makes a lot of sense because
Yep.
thinking back to those movies, there is those iconic like highway scenes with the Batmobile, like in these chases, just barreling through pretty much everything like a tank would. And so
Mm-hmm.
I can't argue with that choice.
Mm-hmm.
As much goodwill as I got from realism with my choice of gadgets, I think I kind of threw that out the window and spent it on this choice because I went Keaton with the Batmobile, and so it's definitely not the most realistic, or like you're not going to get the most utility out of this version of the Batmobile, but boy, does it have an iconic look to it. I just imagine like the Hot Wheels version of this car all the time because I had this, and so I had to go with it.
It makes sense. It is very nostalgic. I totally forgot about the Hot Wheels car. I totally forgot about that. Wow. That is definitely a true nostalgia bait, but completely understandable choice.
And I think there's got to be a Hot Wheels collection of like all Batmobile designs at this point. Like I'm sure that exists
It
without
would be a
googling it.
disgrace if there wasn't.
I might have to check that out later and see if that's a reasonably priced thing that I could get. I doubt that it is, or that I
Mm,
should.
yeah.
So hey Isaac,
Yeah.
I'm Batman. Okay, I'm not really Batman, but the
I'm Batman.
voice, the voice of Batman, it
Mm-hmm.
is such a crucial element to this
Mm-hmm.
depiction. It's been teased. There was some. I think it's in Neighbors. Is that the Seth Rogen Zac Efron movie where they're clearly two generations and they're debating like who's Batman, and they're
Yeah,
debating
the bad
Michael
neighbors or
Keaton.
whatever, yeah.
Yeah, they're debating Michael Keaton and Christian Bale, and then
Mm-hmm.
they just go back and forth with the voices, and it's like one Seth Rogen's like, "Oh, it's Michael Keaton, I'm Batman," and then
Mm-hmm.
Zac Efron's like just so gravelly Bale voice, like, "I'm Batman," and they just
Mm-hmm.
go back and
Mm-hmm.
forth. I think of that scene whenever I think about Batman voices.
I totally forgot about that scene. That scene is hilarious.
It is. And so what's interesting here, I think probably the most slam dunk option either of us could have gone with is off the table already for both of us because we've already used our wild card choice. And so
Mm-hmm.
we can't go with Kevin Conroy here, which would
As
have been
much as I
obvious.
want to, because Conroy's voice in that role is iconic. You
Yes.
you you want to talk about something that everyone will recognize. If you played Kevin Conroy's voice completely randomly to a stranger, you'd be like, "Who is that?" I guarantee most of them would say Batman. They
Yeah,
they they might not know it's Kevin Conroy, but they would know it's Batman.
absolutely. Batman the Animated Series, into the Justice League animated series, many of the movies,
Mm-hmm.
the Arkham series as a whole. So crossing
Mm-hmm.
different
Crossing,
medias.
crossing into video games, and then Batman Beyond when he's old man Bruce. He's had that role for 30 years, and that's just absolutely bonkers.
It is. It's iconic. So I think we
Mhm.
both kind of made the choice without even talking about it, but to,
Mhm.
respectfully acknowledge the greatness of Kevin Conroy, but keep things a little more interesting and try and choose from another option.
Mhm.
So I did end up going with Bale for the voice because the gravelly tone, it works for me. That
Mhm.
got me.
Yeah, and it definitely makes sense. I was actually torn, oddly enough, between Keaton and Bale, because again, you got Keaton setting the standard, but then I also had to look at, okay, well, who changes their voice the most in this,
Hmm.
right? And that's, I don't think Keaton really changes his too terribly much. There's enough of a difference. Kilmer does the same thing. George Clooney didn't do it at all. That was just anybody could pick Clooney out if they really tried. It's just like, dude, you didn't even make an effort. What the heck? And then you move on to Bales, which is obviously that deep, gravelly, very much a change from his normal voice. You wouldn't be able to tell. And then even Batfleck's voice changes quite a bit as well. It's really really hard choice when you kind of get down into the nitty gritty of it and vocal tones and sounds, and as someone who just kind of takes to mimicking people a little naturally, it's hard to really pick from this. I almost have to agree with Bale just because of the vocal dynamic change for where his voice sits as Bruce Wayne to where he gets down into that basement and just lets the rasp and the gravel just go for
Yeah.
his Batman.
Yeah, totally.
It's and what was everyone's favorite thing to do after, watching Batman Begins and The Dark Knight? Just, I'm Batman. It's just so iconic for how that voice we kind of all think should sound.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's a really strong point you make there about there being just such a dynamic shift in Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne speaking and Christian Bale's Batman speaking. It is so it's you wouldn't necessarily be able to link it if you were existing in that universe and experience both those voices. And I think, yeah, you touched on it. Like as much as I gave George Clooney credit for being a great Bruce Wayne, there was not much difference when he was Batman. There was literally no difference, actually. And
Mm-mm.
I think I would give an honorable mention to Ben Affleck here,
Mhm.
just because. So they very clearly, with that depiction, gave him like a voice changer or something like. So there's a mechanical digital element to
Yes,
it.
they did. Yeah, I forgot about that. It was like a collar. It was like right on his collar, right where his vocal cords sit. They had that little gadget there.
Yeah, and I think that was a very creative way, like a very realistic, very Batman way to
Mhm.
go about it.
Mhm.
But we're
Uh,
gonna
uh,
go with the people who did it all natural,
mhm.
and so Christian Bale runs away with it
Mhm.
for me.
And that it is a very Batman way to approach it, and it actually makes sense for the older Batman depiction that we got out of Ben Affleck as well.
Of course, yeah. I think I think we have a pretty solid Batman in place
Mhm.
with all well, two pretty solid Batmen. Uh,
Mhm.
but we need someone for him to fight. We need a villain.
Mhm. Mhm.
Batman obviously has, only Spider-Man could potentially rival Batman in terms of iconic
Rogues
villains.
galleries, yep.
Rogues Gallery, that's the term I was looking for.
Mhm.
And even then, Batman still, I think it's still an easy choice between the two.
Mhm.
And so this was hard. This was a very hard decision to make. Um, Despite all of the love that I have for the Joker as a character and also the depictions by both Nicholson and Ledger, I wanted to go a different direction. And so I ended up going with Killian Murphy's Scarecrow from Batman Begins. And I think what really sold me on this was just how terrifying some of those scenes with the hallucinations are in that movie. And just, I love that kind of psychoactive element to it that the character brings. And some of the affection I have for the character in general definitely is from the character's depiction in the Arkham games. But I do think that it works in that universe. And so I'd go with Scarecrow here. Where did you land on a villain?
I had to go with the low hanging fruit here, and it's hard for me not to, even though I wanted to. I've got a couple of good honorable mentions, but I went with the low hanging fruit of Ledger's depiction of the Joker. In his last role, he got so into it, and he had such a brilliant portrayal of a villain that just didn't care. It was very much the true psychotic elements of the Joker. Like, we didn't get to see the origin story, but the way he acted, the way he did things, and just kind of seemed off the wall and unhinged, and all of the "you'll never stop me, Batman" type of things that just kind of went down. It honestly, I don't think you could get a better live action depiction of what you would think would be the Joker from even from like the animated series or the games or the comics. It was that well done. Now, I
Yeah.
have to give an honorable mention to Tom Hardy's Bane. Did a very good
Mhm.
job with that. And I have to give an honorable mention, oddly enough, to Jim Carrey's Riddler. I
Okay.
loved Carrey's Riddler. I loved it just because I honestly just think Carrey's range when it comes to that just fit. That he
Yeah.
was very composed as scientist Edward Nigma, and then he got his little brain drain machine, and the frickin' psycho switch just flipped, and it was great. I
Yeah.
thought it just fit. But those are my two honorable mentions for that.
I obviously, I couldn't and I would never try and argue that Heath Ledger's Joker is an incorrect choice here. I think it's amazing depiction of the character, and it was an amazing performance in general. And it's a shame that we lost him, and he wasn't able to reprise the role in any way, shape, or form. The Joker in general, the depictions, just amazing. I mean, we had Nicholson, we had Ledger, we had potentially Mark Hamill in either he worked across from Kevin Conroy in both animated series movies and in the Arkham series. So arguably just as iconic as the Joker as Kevin Conroy is as Batman. That would
Mm-hmm.
have been a totally reasonable option for a wild card choice as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think can we also just take a step back? First of all, thank you for giving us the Batman Forever love with mentioning Jim Carrey.
Yeah, yeah.
We've been
And
just not acknowledging that movie basically this entire
mhm.
segment.
And it's hard to acknowledge, and it's I still can't forgive them for the nipple suit. I really just can't.
Yeah, that's fair. It's fair to hold a grudge on that one. But
Mm-hmm.
let's just acknowledge some of the actors who have portrayed Batman villains, right? So we've mentioned, Heath Ledger, Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, all of these, prestigious actors. And then we've
Jack
also
Nicholson, Liam Neeson,
of course, yes.
Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
There's
Oh, that's a good
so many.
transition piece.
Yeah,
Because
so
Tommy Lee
many good
Jones
ones.
is Two-Face,
Mhm.
falling into this category. We also have
Mhm.
Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy. We have
Yep.
Arnold as Professor Freeze or Dr. Freeze.
Mr. Freeze.
Mr.
Yep.
Freeze. Oh my
So
gosh,
it's
they have so many names.
he's Dr. Victor Freeze, but he goes by Mr.
Mr.
Freeze when he puts
Freeze.
the suit on. And wow, Arnold's portrayal was interesting,
So we had
to say the least, and so many bad cold puns.
yep.
Mm.
We
Ugh.
got quite the pool of characters to choose from for a Batman villain, to say the least. So I think we picked some good ones there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bonus round, Isaac. What is so originally a little glimpse behind the curtain. I was thinking of making this a sidekick category as a bonus, but
Mm-hmm.
really our options were just going to be what, like Chris O'Donnell and then Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Was he a sidekick
I
in
really
Dark Knight
can't even.
Rises?
I can't even really put Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Really, the only option is well, and you did have a Batgirl as well. I'm trying to remember who it was.
Oh, Alicia
Opposite.
Silverstone.
Yes, it was Alicia Silverstone. That's who it was. But if you're only picking between Chris O'Donnell and Alicia Silverstone, now granted, you could go with a wild card here as well,
Yeah.
because and you would almost be forced into that corner if you did. So
Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
glad. I'm glad you didn't. I'm not gonna lie.
So
I'm glad you didn't.
it seemed a little more fair to go Alfred here. So I went again. I went more iconic with this choice, and we actually had a good conversation about kind of the archetypes that Alfred, the character of Alfred, has fallen into, and we identified a couple of different roles that he plays in the different depictions by the different
Mhm.
character actors. And so I chose Michael Goff, who played Alfred from 1989's Batman. He was also in Batman Returns, Batman Forever, and then the final role, where Alfred passes away, is in Batman and
Mhm.
Robin.
Mhm.
And so I think for the longevity of that depiction of the character, for sure, that's a big point in his favor. But I also think that he kind of falls into the what I would dub the caretaker role of Alfred, where he really embodies like this is someone who is like a father figure to Bruce, and also he crosses paths with um, you know Chris O'Donnell's Dick Grayson, aka Robin, and then Barbara Gordon is I don't even know that she's Barbara Gordon because I think that she's related to Alfred in Batman and Robin.
Yeah, she is. I do remember that. I think they might have taken some creative liberties with that,
Yeah,
but
they must
it
have, and I
was
just thought of that.
she was Barbara Gordon, but I think they took a little bit of creative liberties and kind of they were all the Gordons were in the family tree of of Alfred Pennyworth. I don't know how, and it's something I really want to look up and know for sure, but
Yeah,
that
I
they
think it was like Uncle Alfred or something.
yeah, and I don't know maybe if that was just something that people have called people uncle or auntie on if they just know them, they're not necessarily in the family, but they've known them for forever.
Yeah,
I know that's a custom for some things as well, so it very well could also just be that, but it wouldn't surprise me if they took a little bit of creative liberty with that as well. But that Michael Goff is a really good, really solid choice for an Alfred, just because, like you said, the caretaker Alfred. Then you have uh, Sir Michael Caine as kind of the advisor and moral compass Alfred, and then you had Jeremy Irons in the most recent films as the technician with a little bit of that moral compass as well.
hmm
But you could tell like those two had a relationship, been together for a long time in the Batfleck depictions. I went with Michael Caine, purely from the just all of the sage wisdom and advice. That to me, I always picture Alfred as Bruce's moral compass as to you need to focus not only on your Batman crap, but you need to focus on being Bruce Wayne too.
Yep.
You can't slouch on either of those, and you see that early in Batman Begins when he's kind of undertaking his role as Batman almost too much, and he's sleeping through board meetings, and it's like they're gonna figure this out if you keep showing up and sleeping at board meetings.
Right. Yeah, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. It's a very reasonable answer.
Mhm.
Definitely that moral compass side that you touched on, Michael Caine fits that to a T, and I think it's a really good point because I remember even like I think this might be in the comic version of the Injustice storyline where obviously Batman and Superman are feuding in the Injustice storyline, but Batman I think like gets souped up the way that they all get souped up in that storyline, and then like just kick Superman's ass at one point because the guy he's like you're not making good decisions, and so that stands out to me as like a shining moment of Alfred as this moral compass, not just to Bruce and as Batman, but to like these heroes in general in the larger DC universe.
Mhm. He's kind of always been that, for lack of better terms, the man behind the curtain, trying to keep all of these. He was always trying to keep Batman and Robin and Batgirl and all of the iterations, trying to keep them on the straight and narrow.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, the Justice League gets introduced. Like, oh crap, here we go again. Now I've got this many more people I got to try and wrangle. But he's just one of those people that any of the Justice League individuals throughout the DC universe has been able to come to and get sage advice, whether it's been Barry Allen, Clark Kent. It's always been more the male characters that kind of do that. mainly because they're usually the ones that are a bit more hard-headed. But I know Wonder Woman has consulted Alfred a time or two.
He does have
It's
a interesting relationship with Selena Kyle's Catwoman,
yep,
obviously
yeah,
through Bruce and their relationship
mm-hmm,
too. So yeah, no,
mm-hmm,
definitely he has very good interactions with all the DC characters, or well, not all, but a lot of them
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Many of the heroes for sure.
for sure. So that wraps up our build a Batman. Let's recap our individual lists. So Isaac, why don't you start first and just run through all your answers for all of them?
Okay, so Bruce Wayne, I had Michael Keaton, just setting the standard. Costume was Ben Affleck. Detective skills stayed in the same realm with Ben Affleck. The physicality was Christian Bale. Gadgets was my wild card when I slipped into the Arkham Games version of Batman. The Batmobile was Christian Bale's. The voice, just Christian Bale. The villain was the Joker. Just and I want to elaborate more on that if I can right here because I didn't actually use this right here, but no matter what timeline you see for Batman, there's always a Joker. You'll never not have that. And then Alfred was Sir Michael Caine.
Awesome. Yeah, no, if I saw that version of Batman on screen, I could hardly argue with what I was seeing. Um, However, I did go a different direction. So with my Bruce Wayne, I went George Clooney. It's going to be a crowd pleasing choice. For the costume, I went with Batfleck. Going to go detective skills, Telltale Batman, who's going to be solving those cases for us. Physicality, this was also Batfleck. Just going to be this powerhouse coming in and whooping everyone in a warehouse. Gadgets, Christian Bale, that grounded version of the gadgets repertoire that Batman works with. The Batmobile, iconic Michael Keaton, Batman 89 Batmobile. The voice, we're going with Christian Bale. And then villain, you're gonna be facing off with Scarecrow from Batman Begins, and we're gonna be just dealing with all of the effects of the hallucinogens in that one. And then Michael Goff as Alfred is gonna be standing by to assist as well. So I'm very satisfied with both those lists. I thought those turned out great.
Yeah, there's really very not really much you'd really want to change there.
Which is interesting because as much as the general audience loves to tear down some of these Batman depictions, there's clearly a lot of elements that are really well done that you can pull from. If we made pretty much two completely different versions of Batman, that we would both be very interested in seeing.
Definitely could.
So, a brand new version of Batman is going to be on screen. Uh, like I said, either tonight, tomorrow, if you're listening on release of this episode, or it's already been out, and you'll have to check it out if you've not yet. But Isaac, let's just kind of look at this through a crystal ball a little bit, and let's try and predict what Rotten Tomatoes scores this movie will get from the critics and from the audiences.
Okay, the critics are obviously going to be the hardest part to judge here by far. Critics are usually, I'd argue, hypercritical of anything comic book related, anything superhero related. They're very, very scrutinizing. I don't know if there's really anything that has been greater than fresh from the critic's standpoint when it comes to a comic book film. So it's really hard for me to go above that. I think it's just going to get into fresh. I think it's going to be about a 63 to 65% probably from the critics. I think it'll be written well enough and everything will be realistic enough to please them. And then I think from the audience side of things, the audience it's going to be hard. That's another hard one to judge because obviously we're coming off of the Nolan Bale trilogy. We're coming off of a short stint of Ben Affleck as Batman in the Snyderverse. It's depending on how crowds go in and what they're expecting, I think is going to dictate how that goes. But I have a hard time not seeing it with at least 70 to 75% from the crowds.
Yeah, I think those are reasonable predictions. I so when I did this in the last episode for Uncharted, and I predicted a big chasm between the critic score and the audience score. I said like a 38 for critics and a 62 for audience. And Uncharted actually was very well received by audiences. So I'm going to try and learn from that a little bit if I can with this prediction. But I think it'll be similar. I think there will be a split, and I think that the critics will be a little more harsh, a little more critical, if you will. And so but I do think there is enough here, particularly with the cast, to kind of entice critics to rate it a little bit higher. I think this cast in general, I know critics love great performances. And so when you have Robert Pattinson, you've got Zoe Kravitz, you've got Colin Farrell as Penguin, Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon in this universe. Paul Dano, I'm sure, is going to absolutely crush it with what is shaping up to be like a very creepy rendition of the Riddler. And so I think that might bump up the critics score a little bit. Just this cast doing great at performances. So I would say maybe they'll land at like a 68% for the critics. Nice, like kind of solidly fresh, but nothing that's blowing them away necessarily. It's not going to be like Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight in terms of critical response. However, I think audiences are gonna love this. I think it's shaping up to be something that's different from past versions of Batman. It's gonna be, pardon the pun here, but fresh in the minds of audiences. And so I think we're gonna look at maybe like Uncharted was in the 90s for audiences, so I think I'm gonna go 90s for this too, but maybe like a 92% for the audience score, and that might be a little high, but nerds, when they get something they like, they really let you know.
That is very true, and I know I will definitely let my criticisms be heard about this film. It's one of the films I actually have been wanting to get to, namely because like I'm not going to go in with an extremely high bar because I know the Nolan Batman films are going to be hard to top. It's going to be hard to top from a filmmaking perspective, from a writing perspective, but I want to see how well they do, and I really want to see how well Robert Pattinson and Andy Serkis do as our Batman, Bruce Wayne, and Alfred. I really want to see that relationship. I think if that relationship is good and the writing and the depiction of the other characters is good, I don't see a reason why nerds won't be in love with this and it won't be up in the 90s for the audience and almost in the 70s, I'd argue, from the critics. But again, it's kind of an interesting time in filmmaking. It's an interesting time in depictions, and I guess we're just gonna have to see.
Yep, absolutely. I completely spaced on Andy Serkis. We were talking about this before recording too. Like, I forget that he's in this movie, and so that's just another, big power hitter that's in this cast. So,
hmm
I am going to be checking this out as soon as I can, and I will be definitely putting out a review episode of the podcast. It's going to be this coming Monday. So, the Monday after the release of the Batman, make sure to check that out. And you will have this piece here with our predictions, and then you'll get the review piece on the back end as well. Isaac, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for joining me to talk Batman. We're gonna have to have you back, obviously, to get into video games. So I hope you're geared up and you'll be ready for that.
Oh, I'm always geared up, and honestly, most topics I have at least a mild knowledge of a lot of different things. So feel free to reach out and ding or anything, and be happy to give my 2 cents.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll definitely make that happen. Isaac, before we wrap this up, I want to give you a chance to plug anything that you've got coming up.
After the recording today, and most of the time, you'll usually catch me streaming on Twitch under the InfernalGriffin tag. It's mostly I'm a weekend warrior anymore, just because I do work a lot. But I'm also working on getting a YouTube footprint established as well, also under InfernalGriffin. The link is obviously going to be a little different, but if you search for that name, you should be able to find me. And you can find me under InfernalGriffin on Facebook, on Hover, Twitter, Instagram, all the socials. I've got it all under the same thing. Lots of video games that I'm playing through. I've got a very, very ambitious list for the year that I'm nowhere near where I want to be in terms of completion. So there's going to be a lot of fun to be had, a lot of shenanigans afoot. and hopefully get into maybe a few film reviews on some of the new stuff coming out, because I missed the No Way Home parade on that. But I'm definitely looking forward to the Batman and a few other film releases this year. So happy to try
Awesome.
and get that in there too.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot to look forward to. Definitely make sure you are following Isaac and check out all of that great content. But thank you again, Isaac. I really appreciate you being here. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
I hope to be back soon. So thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Welcome back from our break. I am very excited to move into our next segment, which is going to be bringing us back to the not always the best place to be, which is the Chicago Bears fandom. Especially this last season, there were some painful moments, but there's been some change, and we're at that time of year where there's the eternal optimism, and I am gonna just dive right into it. But I wanted to bring in someone who has a lot more of that expertise of the NFL draft, because we are officially in NFL draft season. At the time of this episode's release, the NFL Combine is going on in Indianapolis. And so it just seemed fitting to bring in NFL draft analyst Jacob Infante to the Waiting in the Sky podcast. Jacob, thank you so much for being here. How's it going today?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, TJ. It's been pretty good. I'm sure, as you can tell, I'm in the car right now, and we've had quite a bit of a path getting here to be able to talk. But I'm glad that we're finally here, and I'm glad that we're able to work this out and talk some NFL draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had kind of a running theme throughout this episode where I've been making some cringy but clever segues. And so, talking about long, difficult paths and the NFL draft seems to go hand in hand, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's very good segue, by the way. I like that a lot. But
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's definitely a long path for the players and for us as fans and all that. So I'm sure it'll be well worth it down the line. But we're in that weird period where, like, okay, free agency hasn't started, the draft is still a few months away, so might as well kick off some draft talk to kind of kill the time, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Jacob is a writer and, like I said, an NFL draft analyst that I have connected with through Windy City Gridiron. So if you're not familiar, I do manage a couple of the social media accounts for Windy City Gridiron, providing some absolutely amazing content on the Chicago Bears. So if you're not already following, make sure you do so. And Jacob is one of the amazing contributors on that team, putting out amazing work in written form, also on podcasts. So, Jacob, it's great to have you here and to have you bring in some of that expertise to this podcast.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I appreciate you having me on. I mean, you've been doing great work here at WCG. So when we got in contact here to figure this out, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I definitely want to be able to help out wherever I can.
Yeah, and so I think we have to start with the obvious, and that's the big changes that the Bears have made this offseason. So they did go out and uh, just really hit the reset button by bringing in new GM Ryan Poles, who also brought with him assistant GM Ian Cunningham to the front office. And then Matt Eberflus was brought in as the Bears' new head coach and brought with him an entirely new coaching staff. I just want to start off, Jacob, if you want to share your kind of general take on those moves and where the Bears are positioned moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, obviously, whenever there's a new coach and a new GM, things are going to look bright in comparison because, a lot of people have been pushing for Pace and Nagy to be gone for, a while. I mean, I'm of the opinion they should have moved on last offseason, but regardless, they're here. And we're here now as Bears fans, and we have a new GM and new head coach, and I'm excited. I mean, I can't lie and say that a defensive minded head coach wasn't my first choice necessarily, but I do like the leadership ability and personality that Matt Eberflus brings. I think that he's a sound defensive coach who should be able to truly lead and be a strong factor in the locker room. So I'm definitely encouraged to see what happens. I mean, obviously, with these first-time head coaches and GMs, it can be a little unpredictable. You don't know necessarily what you're going to get, but I'm confident. And Ryan Poles coming from such a strong organization like the Chiefs is certainly encouraging. And from my understanding, he's been a key factor in why the Chiefs are where they are right now. So I'm excited. I think that change was necessary, and I'm looking forward to see what the new regime can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of was eyeing those offensive minded head coaches as well. In particular, I was on the Brian Daboll train. So
Yeah.
it was a little bit of a shock to see the Bears go defense with the head coaching position, but only time is going to tell how these hiring decisions will play out. So for now, we're gonna jump on board and offer support for these guys and hope they can complete a quick turnaround for the Bears.
Yeah, no, like that's the fun part about whenever a move is made is because you're always, to an extent, always optimistic about it. So this is the fun part. I'm hoping there's going to be more fun down the line where we actually see some wins as Bears fans coming our team's way. But time will tell. Time will tell, and it's just good to keep an open mind and be hopeful for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. A playoff win would be nice too, but I know that's asking a lot.
Yeah,
So
it's been too long since we've had one of those.
yeah, exactly. So Jacob, I was wondering if you can kind of highlight some of the areas that you see as the Bears' biggest needs right now. Obviously, before the draft, we also have the free agency period, so that's going to shift a little bit. But as of right now, what are some of the draft needs that you see for the Bears?
Yeah, as of right now, I think that the three biggest needs are, in no order, I'd say wide receiver, cornerback, and center. I think that those are the biggest needs on the roster right now. At receiver, you only have Darnell Mooney and Daz Newsome under contract. There's bound to be some sort of changing of the guard there. I don't know necessarily how aggressively they'll be in free agency, but I do expect them to consider a receiver early in the draft. And the same goes at corner. Jalen Johnson's the only proven capable starter at an NFL level. Kendall Vilder had a rough year. Duke Shelley wasn't necessarily great. Thomas Graham Jr. showed some promise, but he still has a small sample size, so you can't definitively say whether he's going to be good or not. And Artie Burns is a free agent. He was better than I expected him to be, but again, at this point, he's a high-end backup, not necessarily someone you want starting. So I think that secondary is going to need some improvement. And then center, Sam Mustipher didn't have a very good year either. And the Bears, at least in my opinion, I thought they made a mistake of not bringing in any form of competition, even though Mustipher was good to close out the 2020 season. That's such a small sample size. They trusted that sample size so much and didn't really provide any actual competition. That's what they did at corner with Vildor and Shelley, and that's what they did at center with Mustipher. So I think those are the three biggest needs. There are a couple other positions that stand out. Defensive lineman could be a defensive tackle specifically. Off-ball linebacker and safety stand out as potential needs, and maybe offensive guard or offensive tackle, whatever they plan on doing with Tevin Jenkins, Larry Borum, where they have those guys and what they do with James Daniels. So a lot of moving pieces for sure, a lot of different areas that the Bears can choose to consider in free agency in the draft this year.
Yeah, definitely. I'm hearing essentially just a lot of needs.
Yeah.
Is the condensed version of that answer, right? So I wanted to, try my hand at this because how hard could being an NFL GM really be, right? So full disclosure, I'm not someone who really digs into draft prospects all that often. I let experts like yourself do that, and then I'll kind of tag along when I get the chance to dive into some of those articles and videos and such. But I did want to get into this mock draft simulator because this is something that I really got a kick out of last year, where I just did like countless amounts of mock drafts. Not one I think had Justin Fields going to the Bears, but
Yeah.
So I think for this exercise, it would be great if we could kind of go pick by pick, and I could explain my thought process to you with where I was heading with each selection, and then have you just kind of give us a little bit of commentary, critique my choices a little bit. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds fun to me. I always like getting the chance to look over people's mock drafts and just seeing what I think. So this should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, hopefully it is fun and not just me getting torn down and put on blast here. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. So Jacob, I made the point that there is a lot of needs. Well, I reworded your point that there's a lot of needs on this team, and so I kind of went into this with the philosophy of trying to take as many shots as possible to fill as many of those needs as we can. And the best way to do that is by trading and trading back. So the Bears have their first pick in this year's draft at pick 39 in the second round because of the Justin Fields trade last year that saw their first round pick going to the New York Giants. So I wanted to make the most out of that pick there, and I thought I could see some value in trading back. And then in this particular simulation, we see Malik Willis, the quarterback out of Liberty, fall to that section right there at pick 39. And one of the quarterback needy teams just couldn't help themselves. And they wanted to give the Bears some value to trade up to that position so that they could take Willis at that number 39 spot. And that was the Washington Commanders. And they're the Commanders, right, Jacob?
Yeah. So that's it's still weird to say, really, just because I think I've probably only said Washington Commanders like once or twice since they've been renamed, and it's still kind of surreal to me to hear. But yeah, Washington Commanders, it is.
Yeah. I think that is one of the first times I've said it out loud as well. So they're quarterback needy, and this is the only time it's really going to stand out to me, kind of the storyline of the draft. But I think that is one where Malik Willis falls. Washington got excited and decided to trade with the Bears, and so that trade looks like this. Washington is sending over pick number 42, pick number 73, and pick number 111 in this draft in exchange for Chicago's pick number 39, pick 71, and a 2023 sixth round pick. Essentially, the Bears are going to give up a 2023 sixth in order to acquire a fourth round pick in this draft, and then they drop 2 or 3 spaces in the second and third rounds. Any thoughts on this deal?
Yeah, so I definitely like that. I think that moving down twice approach is honestly kind of underrated within that draft sphere because you're able to pick up a fourth round pick, which the Bears currently don't have. And I think that, like we mentioned, with how many needs they have, it's very crucial to have as much day 2, day 3 capital as possible. So being able to stock up, I think, is a really good approach. So I'm a fan of that trade for sure.
Good to hear. So now the Bears are sitting at pick number 42 with their first choice in the 2022 draft. And pick 42 comes along, and you know what? I'm still not sold on the value here. So I think to myself, why not explore some more options, and let's see if we can add a few more picks here while we're at it. So get a call from Miami, and Miami is looking to send over pick number 50, pick 101, and then a 5th and 7th round pick in the 2023 draft in exchange for pick 42 and one of the Bears' 2 5th round picks of the 2022 draft. Any thoughts on this deal?
Yeah, I think this is another good one. I mean, and I feel like I'll be repeating myself here, but I do feel like the more value you get, the better, especially in round 3, round 4. I think that might be the sweet spot in this draft because there are a handful of guys I can see with legitimate chances, like NFL starters at the next level, and ultimately that's what you want to get out of that range. Guys, who contribute in the starting lineup the best they can. I'm a fan of the double trade down. I know the Bears did that in 2016, and they were still able to get Cody Whitehair, and then the Bears never did it again under Ryan Pace, which I'll never understand why they didn't do that. But regardless, I think it's a good strategy to have for sure. And just moving back, I think, is able to maximize your value and build a really well-rounded roster.
For sure, yeah, and we still don't know what Ryan Pohl's approach to the draft is going to be. But in this situation with me in the driver's seat, I really just wanted to emphasize getting some more picks and really getting some value in this draft to help the team restock and rebuild moving forward. So the first pick for the Bears ends up moving back to pick number 50 overall. And it was a little tough waiting that long. But when I looked at some of the options there, I felt like I was pretty comfortable with that decision. This first choice might upset some people that really want to see Justin Fields get a shiny new toy in the form of a wide receiver to play with. However, I ended up going on the other side of the ball and went with Darian Kendrick, cornerback out of Georgia. Any thoughts on that selection?
I think that's good value at 50, honestly. I think that you're looking in round 2, there are going to be a handful of corners I think could realistically go that high, and Kendrick's definitely one of them. I think he brings a lot to the table. He's a very fluid athlete. He's coordinated, loose hips. He's got good upfield acceleration, so he can defend deep if need be. And he's an intelligent guy who's got really good ball skills and tracks the ball down, kind of like a wide receiver, I feel like. So there's a lot of upside with him there for sure. I think that he doesn't have the physicality, in my opinion, to go round 1, but because of his athletic upside and what he brings to the table there, he'd be a very good pick in round 2, and honestly, a really good compliment to Jalen Johnson. You know, they're different skill sets, different players, and I feel like you get the best of both worlds with those two in your secondary. So I'm a fan of that pick for sure. And again, I do understand if people want to go offense first, but you just got to go with value here, regardless of position. And I think that Kendrick is great value, fits a need, plays a valuable position, and just overall, I think is a good player who should be able to start in the league for years to come.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Bears secondary this past season showed that it's in need of an influx of talent. So even if the Bears do decide to spend some money at cornerback in free agency, I think still using that draft value to add Kendrick here would be a good way to really solidify that group moving forward. And, you know, with Eberflus being a defensive-minded guy, I'm sure that the secondary struggles have not gone over his head by any means.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the Colts have done a good job of maximizing their output in some of their defensive backs. So I think that there's certainly room for improvement in Chicago's secondary. So I wouldn't be opposed to going corner in round 2 if the value's right. I mean, especially if you're able to move back 2 times and be able to pick up some extra draft capital in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at the whole picture here, that is definitely a consideration. I now moving into the third round. So the Bears originally had the 71st choice here, but after the deals, they end up with the 73rd choice. And looking at the options and what was available, I actually ended up doubling down on defense with this pick, and I went with Chad Muma, the linebacker out of Wyoming.
Yeah, so I like that pick. I like Chad Muma a lot. I think he's a very good fit in this Eberflus kind of system that they have going on. When I watch Chad Muma, I see speed and relentlessness, and I think that those are two things that Eberflus loves in his linebackers or just his defenders in general. And you're watching a guy who's Muma, he's like bigger. I want to say 6'2", like 240 pounds, and he moves well for his size. He's a pretty fluid athlete, and he's got really good closing speed. And when you get a guy who's that big, who's able to move in a straight line as fast as he does, he's able to deliver some hits. And Matt Eberflus has his hits acronym, so kind of fitting that you're getting a hard hitter at linebacker there. And I know that you might end up upsetting some people going back to back defense, which, like, I understand, but also keep in mind there's still free agency here. There's still opportunities to address the offensive line, to add receivers, what have you. So I certainly wouldn't be mad with this approach by any means. I think the value for both of these picks has been really good. And I'd certainly be a fan of Kendrick and Muma as the first 2 picks. And I mean, I think he's a good fit as a Mike linebacker alongside Roquan Smith as well. I think that he's the type of guy who can step in pretty early and make an impact for a defense.
Yeah, I think the kind of the dream scenario with this pick is that you end up recreating what the Bears had with, Lovie Smith and Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs in the form of Matt Eberflus, Roquan Smith, and Chad Muma. That's the dream scenario. Obviously, that's lofty goals. But the connective tissue is there. You could see some similar traits in both those guys. You mentioned it. The ability to cover the field and get to the ball quickly is something that Urlacher and Briggs were known for. And so if you're able to, recreate a percentage of that, it could be great for this defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are some similarities there. I do think that Urlacher is better in coverage than Muma is. I think he's still developing his spatial awareness and zone, but bigger athletic guys who can hit hard, complemented with Lance Briggs type. Although I think Roquan's more athletic, but that same archetype of like shorter linebackers, but still plenty talented guys who are very technically sound, intelligent tacklers. So I'd definitely be a fan of that as the linebacking duo for hopefully for years to come in this scenario.
Yep, that would. I think if that's how it ended up shaking out, and as well as if the Bears were able to address some of those offensive positions of need in free agency, that would work out pretty well, at least through these first 2 picks. So I'm glad to hear you're on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving along, we were able to add a second third round pick here. And so at the end of the third round, pick number 101, I do have the Bears addressing the offensive line in the form of offensive tackle Abraham Lucas from Washington State. The idea here, Jacob, is that this is a guy who, from what I've seen, possesses a lot of, like the size that you're looking for in a true tackle. Has some of that, strength and power to him, a little bit of nasty that Ryan Poles has already commented on. And so it seems like a guy that Ryan Poles might realistically give a look here. Anything to add to that?
I like Abraham Lucas as a late value. So that's still technically late round 3 there at 101, you said it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's really good value for Lucas, who I think is a top 100 player in this class right now. And I don't think enough people are talking about him because he had a really good 2020, but he came back and he had a really good 2019 too. So there was a lot of buzz there. And this year he just hasn't been getting a lot of that buzz, but he's still a very good player. I mean, he's huge. I don't have it in front of me right now. I want to say he's like 6'6", like 320, something like that. And he's powerful, he's strong, and he's nasty at the point of attack. And he's the type of guy, once he gets his hands on you, it's very tough to break free from. So there's a lot to like with him. He's an underrated athlete for his size. Keep in mind that, Mike Leach used to be the head coach at Washington State, and they ran an air raid system. So you're dropping in pass protection a lot. And these, last 2 years, I want to say it was, he didn't, necessarily drop exclusively back into pass coverage. He was able to more or less diversify his skill set and help out as a run blocker as well. But just keeping in mind that extensive pass protection experience, I think there's a lot to like with Abraham Lucas. And the real question is here, what you plan on doing with Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum here, because Abraham Lucas projects best as a right tackle. So do you move one of Jenkins or Borum to guard? Who do you keep at left tackle? But ultimately, I'm a fan of just the process of getting as many linemen as possible and working from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm also in that same camp with my thought process here was just adding some talent to that group. I think this is another area it was pretty obvious that the Bears had significant room for improvement at. So, yeah, you raised that important and interesting question, which is, what kind of impact does this have on guys like Jenkins and Borum? I know that there are people who are not sold on Jenkins as a left tackle necessarily. There are people who are not sold on what position Borum should be playing. I think this offers flexibility. If Lucas comes out and is competitive right off the bat and kind of locks down a right tackle spot potentially, then maybe that gives you the option to move Borum into guard. Maybe it gives you the opportunity to have just a really quality swing tackle with upside behind your starters. And I'm fine with either of those scenarios.
Yeah, definitely. And some people projected Borum best as a guard anyway. So I think that he could kick there. Even Tevin could maybe kick into guard if need be. But ultimately, I'm glad you and I are on the same page. Like with this kind of a roster, we want to be able to build as much offensive line talent as possible, regardless of position. Because, I mean, you can teach new positions. And while it's not necessarily ideal, and you want to have everyone, perfectly slotted in their natural positions, uh, I think it's better to just take great value at offensive line over reaching for someone just because they play at left tackle or right tackle or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now we move on to the next pick, which is pick number 117 in the 4th round. And, I know people were excited that it finally got to offense. And now I unfortunately have to backpedal a little bit and go back to the defensive side of the ball with this choice. I had to, because, Jacob, one of the biggest things two of the biggest things that have upset me over the last few years as a Bears fan is, one, watching the revolving door of players next to Eddie Jackson at the second safety position. And
Yeah.
two, watching the revolving door that is Eddie Jackson at the safety position. And so I wanted to accomplish 2 things with this pick, and that is lock down that safety position with a guy who is known for, being able to make solid tackles, and kind of bring that element to the secondary. And so I ended up going with Bubba Bolden, who is the safety out of the University of Miami, which obviously does come with his own question marks, dealing with some injury issues. But even with that considered, what do you make of this pick?
I like that Bubba Bolden pick a lot. I think that if not for his injury history, I mean, I know for a fact that he suffered season-ending injuries this past year and in 2019. I'd have to go back and double check to see what other injuries he's had, but I know for a fact that those 2 are there. But with that out of the way, I think that if Bubba Bolden's healthy, he's pushing for like an early second round value, in my opinion, because he's a big safety who's like 6'2", 6'3", 200 pounds, got long arms. He's physical. He isn't afraid to, charge downhill and lower the boom on someone, so to speak. And he can also move well in coverage too for someone who's as big as he is. Sometimes you see the issue of, you're a bigger safety. It's a little bit tougher to sink your hips and explode coming out of your brakes. That's not as much of an issue with Bolden. And I think he moves well for his size. And he's got that overall athletic ability to just project as a quality safety at the next level. If he can stay healthy, that's the big thing with him. But if he can, you're looking at a big safety who's athletic, can move well. Is definitely a great fit alongside Eddie Jackson. You can definitely work with that for sure.
Yeah, and I just realized I kind of buried the lead with this one too, Jacob, because if you weren't so much sold on the Bubba Bolden pick in general, how about if it was part of another trade back? So originally, the Bears were sitting at pick number 111 that they had acquired from Washington here. And so what I ended up doing with this trade is packaged pick 111 with a 2023 5th rounder, now that we had accumulated some additional 2023 capital in that Miami deal.
Yeah.
Sent those over to Baltimore in exchange for pick 117, which we used on Bolden here. In addition, also picked up another 4th round pick, number 138, a 6th round pick, number 194, and then a 2023 7th rounder. So with a little more context, and then also just the deal of itself, thoughts on a third trade back?
You're speaking my language, TJ. I think that I'm a big fan of just moving back and accumulating draft capital. And I like that concept. I like what you've done with these picks. I think that, again, like we've been saying, just with this roster, with how many needs they have, it's just nice to be able to stockpile. And when you draft as efficiently as you'd like to, as I believe you have so far, I think you're really maximizing that draft talent. So definitely a fan of that for sure.
Yeah, and so that was my third and final trade of the simulation. So just kind of recapping a little bit, we were able to ultimately send away 5 2022 picks in exchange for 8 2022 picks. So we're going to net 3 additional picks in the 2022 draft from that. And
Yeah.
then also sent away just 2 2023 picks in exchange for 3 2023 picks. So we're going to also net an additional pick in next year's draft as a result of these 3 trades.
Yeah, and that's something that I don't think Ryan Pace kept in mind enough. I think just that future draft capital and that overall ability to consistently stockpile talent over the course of the couple of years there. I mean, and obviously he'd end up using future draft capital to move up for people, and then just keep pushing back and pushing back. But eventually, you're gonna book yourself into a corner here. So I like the approach of being able to pick up future draft picks and being able to just go into the next season with a little bit more to work with in the draft. So I'm a fan of that approach for sure. And when you're as efficient in maximizing 2022 talent, and you're still able to see some just overall net improvement at the 2023 value level, I think that's definitely encouraging.
Yeah, and this all comes with the caveat, like, there's no way of really knowing how accurate the NFL mock draft database trade simulator is. But it seems like it's based off of, what's pretty standardized as the trade value chart now. And so I was pretty satisfied with what I was able to do with these deals. So looking ahead to now our second pick of the fourth round at number 138, I finally was able to find what I thought was some upside and some good value at the wide receiver position in the form of Kyle Phillips, who is a receiver out of UCLA. And this was a name that I came across recently. A colleague of ours at Windy City Gridiron is EJ Snyder, who's another draft analyst there. And he had some very nice things to say about Kyle Phillips and as a prospect. And so, this might be a little bit of a reach, is what I gather, but as someone who offers some upside and some playmaking ability at the wide receiver position, I thought it was worth the mid-round pick here. What do you have to add to that, Jacob?
Yeah, so I'm admittedly someone who has to watch a little bit more of Kyle Phillips. I've only been able to formally break down like a game or two of his at this stage. So I'm gonna watch a little bit more of him over this pre-draft process. But from what I've seen, I do understand what people like from him. He's a good athlete. He's got above average deep speed, and he's the type of guy who can stretch the field pretty well. He's elusive after the catch. He plays tough. I know he's smaller. He's sub 6 foot, and he's like 170 something pounds, but he plays hard, and he fights hard for extra yardage, and he's slippery in the open field. So I do understand why people like him for sure. And I think EJ compared him to Hunter Renfrow. It was either EJ or someone in EJ's replies who compared him to Hunter Renfrow recently, I want to say. And I can see it. I don't think Phillips is as technically sound as a route runner as Renfrow was coming out of Clemson, but I think similar body types, similar athletic traits, similar mentalities. So I do like that pick. I At this stage, I think that's a bit of a reach, but again, I still have a lot of work to do on him. So we could be looking at this like a month from now, and I'm saying, oh, there's no chance Kyle Phillips is going to fall to 138. Instead of me saying, oh, 138 is a little bit steep. So we'll see what happens over the course of the process. But I understand why people like him, and I'm excited to do a little bit more breakdowns on him.
Yeah, and it's also, there's a little bit of a consideration of special teams value in this pick too, right? Because the Bears punt returner position in general is up in the air with Jakeem Grant, who was a Pro Bowler, but he is a free agent this year. We also, Tariq Cohen sat out the whole year, who had previously been a Pro Bowl return man as well. So it's hard to say. I think Daz Newsome might be the only guy who's currently contracted who had done some punt return work this past season. So if Kyle Phillips could come in and make an impact there as well, then maybe it does justify reaching a little bit for that position here.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Kyle Phillips is one of the best return men in this class. I want to say he averaged something like over 20 yards per return in college, and he had 2 total returns for touchdowns at UCLA. So you're looking at a guy who can he can field punts. He can field kickoffs as well at the next level. I think there's a lot to work with there. So that special teams value just only continues to help out his draft stock, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're now venturing into what is the first that I will be using of the Bears' original picks here in the 5th round at 147. And I'm also going to preface these last few picks by just, reiterating that, most of my familiarity with these names comes from just downloaded rosters on NCAA 14 that I'm still playing on my PlayStation 3. So, and who knows how accurate those fan created rosters actually are. But I do see some value, and I saw some value based on kind of the simulator's big board here as well. And so there's also question marks. This is the one position I addressed that you didn't mention earlier on as a position of need. And I get why you wouldn't mention it, but I do think there is still room to add to the running back room with Tariq Cohen as a question mark going into this season still. Damian Williams is a free agent, so not sure if he would be coming back. And so realistically, you're just looking at David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, which very good 1-2 punch there. But as we've seen in recent years, it's always helpful to have a deep running back room. And so I saw the Notre Dame running back, Kyron Williams, I believe is how you pronounce his first name.
Yeah.
Available here. And I thought, in the 5th round, this seems like a decent place to take a chance on a guy who could add a little bit more depth to that running back room. And, depending on what ends up happening with Montgomery as he gets closer to, payday, if he's going to be sticking around, it might be helpful to have another guy in that room that can grow familiar with Luke Getsy's system and potentially stick around for a few years as a contributor.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. Honestly, I think that drafting running backs late it's worth a shot because so many late round running backs develop into starters or at least quality contributors. So as we've seen in Chicago with Khalil Herbert, they selected, who's turned into a solid contributor who's shown promise. David Montgomery is a 3rd round pick. It's a little bit higher, but that still shows. And then Jordan Howard being a 5th round pick a couple of years ago, Tariq Cohen round 4. You can get some legit guys who can stick around for a while and make an impact later on that day 3 there at the running back position. So I think Kyron Williams is fantastic value in round 5. I'm going to have him when it's all said and done in my top 5. I think I have him as RB4 right now. So to have him fall to the 5th round is a dream come true, basically. I think he's, in terms of ball carrier vision, one of the most decisive runners in the class. I think he offers good agility, good breakaway speed, and he has value in the passing game too. He's a really good pass catcher. He's a really good pass blocker, which is a little bit surprising considering he's on the shorter side for the position, but he brings a lot to the table. He's a legit guy who can develop into a 3-down back. So to get that in round 5, regardless of whatever role he plays in 2022, that's really good long-term value. So I like that a lot.
Wow, Jacob, I'm a lot better at this than I thought.
Yeah, you're really doing a good job of hitting all the marks for me here for sure.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't have ignored that phone call from Bill Polian a couple weeks ago.
Come on, man. Yeah, I know it seems like a spam call, but every once in a while, you never know. It might be your lucky day.
Yeah, yep. So we have a couple more picks to get to here. Again, this is kind of what I would dub the crapshoot section of my mock draft. However, I did still want to look for value based on the big board and look for value just based on team needs, as well as just kind of, positional value where we're at. So round 6 at pick 184, This is the second of the two original Bears picks that I'm selecting. And so this is finally addressing one of your three biggest needs, which is center. And from what I understand, it's not a super deep draft at center. So in the 6th round, being able to pick up someone who, might be able to come in and compete, at least, give some type of competitive relationship to Sam Mustipher, and make it a little bit more of a competition for that starting position. And so that comes in the form of Cameron Jurgens, who is a center from Nebraska.
Yeah, so with Jurgens, you're looking at a guy who's a little bit undersized, admittedly. I know he's sub 300 pounds, and he's not like the lengthiest guy out there, but he's technically sound and he's athletic, which I really like. He's the type of guy you can consistently get low at the point of attack, get his weight underneath him, uses his hands well, and he's a really good mover in space. So I think from a power perspective, you're not looking at a true mauler per se, but you're looking at someone who can, clear out a zone pretty well and to be able to seal off lanes in the run game. So I do like that value that late on day 3. I think that I don't know if he's the starter at the next level, but I think he's someone who can at the very least be pretty solid depth. And there's no such thing as too much depth along the offensive line, I believe. So that's a good value pick there. And I think that depending on what they do in free agency, I wouldn't be opposed to Jurgens being a target uh, later there on day 3.
Yeah, I also, as a University of Nebraska system alum, I know firsthand what some of those big corn-fed boys can do down there. So bringing that to the Bears locker room could be beneficial for sure, even as depth, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now, Jacob, this is the final pick. I wasn't able to swing a 7th rounder in the 2022 draft. But I thought that was okay since we were doubling up on 3rd round, 4th round, and 6th round picks. So a little bit of a trade-off here. So the final pick is coming at pick 194 in the 6th round. And this is, for me, this was a lot of reputation of the institution, if I'm being totally honest. And so I went with a defensive tackle, I believe, LeBrian Ray out of Alabama. And the thought process was I know that Alabama always has just an incredibly, competitive, tough, strong defensive line. Nick Saban, I don't know why I couldn't think of Nick Saban's name, but Nick Saban knows how to coach these guys up. And, obviously Bill Belichick approves of his ability to do so. And so LeBrian Ray here, was my choice to try and bring in a guy who can play that 3 technique role for Matt Eberflus and Alan Williams on the defensive end.
Yeah, and I think LeBrian Ray's a good fit as a 3 tech. I think he's the type of guy, he's a little bit raw from a technical perspective, but I like his raw strength and I like his burst off the snap. And that's something that Eberflus likes, those explosive 3 techs who can, maybe generate a little bit of pressure in the passing game. And Ray's the type of dude, he's got a strong enough anchor. He can eat up gaps well in the run. And if you're able to work to maybe minimize the issues of pad level or something and maybe add a little bit more in his pass rushing arsenal, he's the type of guy I think can be a solid rotational defensive lineman at the next level. And I think getting that in the 6th round is very good value, especially, with where the Bears are at right now, with how much they have, like how much is up in the air at the defensive line position. I think that that'd be a good value and just a good overall position to target in the draft this year.
Totally. And so I'm kind of hoping for lightning to strike twice, so to speak, after last year, Kiris Tonga being a 7th round pick and still managing to make an impression during the regular season. I would argue pick for pick in last year's draft class, you're looking at probably Herbert and Tonga as those guys that ended up being the greatest value. So if you're able to kind of replicate that to a certain extent in the form of LeBrian Ray, who might be a better fit scheme-wise for the new defense, I would take that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think just overall in this class, you did a good job of thinking about scheme fit and just finding raw, pure talent and value. I know some people like to draft for need a bit too often, but I think that it's equally as important, if not more so, to just get the value and put together the best roster as you possibly can. So I like this mock draft for sure. I'm definitely a fan of what you're able to put together.
Thank you. Yeah. Like I said, it was fun to dive a little bit more into it. I did do just like very minimal research into these guys as I was coming up on the clock. So I realized I probably wouldn't be cut out for the actual GM position because that probably wouldn't fly. But
Yeah,
but Jacob, also before we get wrapped up here, I do want to talk a little bit. Well, I should say I want to give you a stage to kind of talk about some of your draft crushes.
yeah, definitely. So it's really good timing that we have this out. So I recently, like, as of this recording, I'll have just published both my offensive and defensive, my guys team to quote. So that's just an offense and defense made up of the guys at each position. I probably like more than the average person. So a couple of guys that I like. I've made it very much known that I'm a fan of David Bell, the receiver out of Purdue, almost to the point of parody at this point. And I think he's a physical receiver who can separate well. Uh, and you're not looking at a true speedster, but you're looking at a route running technician with very, very good hands and good physicality at the catch point. Sky Moore, wide receiver out of Western Michigan, is incredibly fast and a polished route runner that I really like. You're looking at Tyler Smith, offensive lineman out of Tulsa. He's nasty, just physical, and he's the type of guy that you really want a tone setter like that along the offensive line. So I'm a very big fan of him as well. Just a couple other guys I'm looking for, thinking about defenders. I like Chad Muma as a linebacker. Jojo Doman from Nebraska is another guy that I really like. I think he's got a lot of value dropping back in coverage. Corner, I like Marcus Jones out of Houston as a guy that I think is really good, just athletic tools, and he's a valuable return man. And then the last guy I want to go with is Kirby Joseph, a safety out of Illinois, who I think is really intelligent and he moves well. He's not an elite athlete, but just because of how quick he processes things, he's able to move around all over the field.
Awesome. Yeah, it's nice to hear a couple of names to look out for sure. And I'm gonna have to check out that full list of those guys just to add a little bit more information to what I'm working with here. I honestly, through this exercise, I have kind of revamped my interest in the draft process and kind of the scouting process. I'm never going to be the guy to sit down and watch tons of film. So don't worry, I'm not coming for you, Jacob. I know you were, shivering in your boots just at the thought, but no, that's awesome. It's great to hear some of those guys to be on the lookout for. I think a great way to wrap up this conversation is if we can try to look into our crystal balls and make one Bears draft prediction each. How does that sound? Is that something you think you could pull off?
Yeah, I'm just gonna warn you that this one's entirely off of gut because I do have one in mind that I was actually thinking about before we started because I was thinking, I have a feeling this guy could end up with the Bears because of his playing style. So I do have a guy in mind that I think the Bears could draft, and I'm looking. I like close my eyes. I imagine the pre-draft graphic popping up on the TV, and if it looks good, if it looks like okay, I can see this, then that's just my gut feeling saying it could happen. I know it's a weird process, but that's how I got to. At some point in the draft, the Bears will take Cincinnati safety Brian Cook. That's
Okay.
a very specific prediction. I'm not saying that with like a source or anything. That's just me saying my gut. Brian Cook as an intelligent, hard-hitting safety with solid like speed downfield. I think he's the type of guy who Matt Eberflus would like in the secondary. So that's my ultra specific, ultra vague. Well, those two things mean absolutely different things. Ultra specific gut feeling. Brian Cook will end up a Chicago Bear.
Yeah. So it just means it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm totally fine with that. Like we already went over, I definitely feel like safety can and probably should be addressed in the draft. So if they're able to do that, I would have no complaints with that move for sure. I'm gonna I went back and forth with this. This is probably the opposite of a gut take on this one, if I'm
Yeah.
being honest, because I and it coincides with what I ended up doing. But I think that Ryan Poles is going to trade back twice, at least
Okay.
twice in this draft. Um, and I know this is partly GM speak, but he did make the comment that he really wants to build quote unquote the right way through the draft. And unfortunately, Pace has not really stocked a lot of those depth pieces, has not really been stockpiling draft capital by any means. In fact, doing the opposite. And while I'm totally fine with having Justin Fields as our first round pick for consecutive years, I do think that there's value to be had in some trading back. So I think Ryan Poles and his new front office team will see that value as well, and I think we'll see a couple of trades back in April.
I hope that's the case. I certainly do. As we've seen here through this episode, especially, I'm a big fan of that process. So I'm hoping that yours comes true, especially.
Yeah, and I don't know necessarily that it'll be quite as conservative. It probably won't be as conservative as my mock was, where I traded back and it was 3 times and I didn't trade up at all. If I'm being totally honest, I didn't trade up because a lot of the names didn't mean enough to me to warrant that. But I do see a couple of trades back, and then they might be super aggressive on some mid round guys that they're really high on and see some good value in, and so maybe they trade up in like the fourth, third round or something like that, where they really can see some benefit in doing so. But I do think that Poles is going to try and accumulate some draft capital to restock the cupboards.
Most certainly, most certainly. And time will tell exactly what they do. There's still free agency. There's still a lot of stuff to happen, but I'm excited for this draft process, and I hope that they take a similar approach to what we have in mind. But we'll see. We'll see. There's a reason that they're the ones in charge, so gotta hope for the best.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, like Jacob just said, we are in peak draft season. So, at the time of this or the time this episode's release, the combine is going to be going on. So, we're just right at the top of the ski lift, and we're about to be riding all the way down into April. So, it's an exciting time, and you're going to definitely want to keep up with Jacob and all of his draft coverage, because he's going to be firing on all cylinders. And I can personally attest to how valuable his work is in providing you some background. If you're just a casual fan of the NFL, or if you're just a hardcore Bears fan and want to have an idea of what some of these guys can do, Jacob is definitely the guy to follow. So, Jacob, why don't you let everyone know where they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can check out my Twitter account at Jacob Infante 24. I obviously do stuff here at Windy City Gridiron. I'm the lead draft analyst there, and I'll be doing some NFL draft rankings, analysis, mock drafts, what have you, in the next couple of months. I also do work over at the Draft Wire. I do a lot of prospect interviews. I've had a couple big ones come out over the last month or so, and there should be a lot more coming up. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, that's where you can find me. TJ, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, the pleasure's been all mine, Jacob. I really appreciate you being here and providing some of that expertise that you carry with you. It's absolutely fantastic. And for full context, I know we've had a lot of struggles getting this recorded and everything. So I appreciate your patience throughout the process and making it happen. And also because you've been on like 6 podcasts in the last 2 weeks. So if you enjoyed hearing from Jacob, definitely check out his other podcast appearances and what he's been able to do and share on those as well. But thank you again, Jacob. We definitely appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, so that was a great conversation with Jacob Infante from Windy City Gridiron and just a general NFL draft analyst. I was super excited to be able to have Jacob come on It's painful sometimes to talk about the Bears in general, but especially when you're doing it on your own, it's rough. You don't have anyone to commiserate with or to share in the optimism in times like this. So it was great to have Jacob on. And great conversation with Isaac as well, talking about Batman and our expectations for the character and what we hope to see in the new movie. Great to have both those guys on this episode. So thankful to both of them for sure. Taking a look at what we've got coming up on the schedule. Monday, we're actually going to have a review episode of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre dropping. And this is if you didn't know that this actually came out, it went straight to Netflix. So streaming on Netflix is the 2022 release Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And let's just say that review is going to be interesting. If you want to hear more about this movie, and you probably do want to hear about it, I don't know so much that you will want to watch it, but you'll want to hear about it. So definitely make sure to check out that episode dropping on Monday. And then you can watch the movie on Netflix. Either it's available now, so you can watch it before the review, or you can wait and determine whether it's worth your time after hearing my thoughts there. And the next full episode, episode 203 of the Waiting in the Sky podcast, is going to be coming on March 17th. To tie into the release of Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise, we are going to be doing a Final Fantasy March Madness tournament bracket. So wanted to find some way to incorporate the legendary, iconic Final Fantasy franchise into the podcast. And because it's just so prolific, there's so many Final Fantasy titles out there, it seemed like a natural fit for a March Madness style bracket. And so I'm very excited to bring in some knowledgeable Final Fantasy guests to go through that process with. Definitely going to be one of our more interesting segments. So you want to make sure you get tuned in for that one. And then just as like a guilty pleasure of mine, because I couldn't help myself, I also want to talk about The Luck of the Irish, the classic Disney Channel original movie that is available now on Disney Plus, about the high school basketball star who comes from a family of leprechauns. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but it's also the whole point of the movie. So that is going to spur a conversation about DCOM's Disney Channel original movies in general, and just kind of taking a look back at that because that episode is dropping on St. Patrick's Day. So what better tie-in than The Luck of the Irish? So very excited for that next episode. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast and that you are able to follow along when that episode releases. Of course, another great way to follow the show is going to be on our social media platforms. You can find us at In the Sky Pod across all of the great social media platforms, your favorite included. So we are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Letterboxd, and also on YouTube if you would prefer to use that platform as a way to listen to the podcast. You can do so currently. You can also follow me on Twitter at TJ Starman if you are so inclined. I want to thank Isaac, aka InfernalGriffin, as well as Jacob Infante for joining us for this episode. Great conversations. I know that this episode was a little bit longer, but I think the quality of the conversation totally justified it. So thank you again to those guys for joining me. And of course, I want to thank my audio producer, Richard Huell, for helping us out and making sure that everything sounds amazing. Just as a quick plug as well, if you're interested in having any kind of audio work done, any editing, things like that, Richard is available. Check out metatronmusic.net and he'll get you set up with whatever it is that you need. I can personally attest to that. But thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next time. Take care.